Here is an account of errors, chance occurrences, and circumstances that resulted in the loss of millions of lives, the fall of empires, the destruction of cities, and at times the salvation of generations. Fact 1. In the spring of 1923, Adolf Hitler was late for a train. He intended to go to Passau for a significant meeting with right-wing allies, but due to a scheduling mix-up, he reached the station 20 minutes past the scheduled time. It might appear insignificant as trains ran frequently, yet this specific journey proved to be critical. The carriage he was scheduled to occupy derailed, resulting in the deaths of several passengers. This event, despite not being widely reported, later fueled superstitions within Hitler's entourage, who claimed fate protects the Führer. However, a closer examination reveals how a minor accidental disruption can foster a belief in being chosen. More noteworthy is how the missed meeting impacted the schedule for preparing the beer hall putsch. The planned actions had to be delayed, and this postponement unexpectedly benefited the nascent Nazis. Law enforcement reduced their surveillance, assuming the uprising had fizzled out. A single scheduling error provided a respite for the plot, which would eventually culminate in the major disaster of the 20th century. Fact 2. In November of 1962, Soviet officer Vasily Arkhipov, aboard the submarine B-59, declined to approve the launch of a nuclear-tipped torpedo. This refusal stemmed from a breakdown in communication. The submarine had been out of contact with Moscow for 24 hours. American destroyers were dropping practice depth charges on it, leading Captain Savitsky to believe war had commenced. The established procedure dictated that a nuclear launch required the consent of 3 individuals: the commanding officer, the political officer, and Arkhipov, who served as deputy. 2 of them agreed to the launch. Arkhipov, however, voted against it. His rationale for refusal was the absence of a clear order and, as he stated, too quiet upstairs for nuclear war. It was not until the 1990s that the world understood the precipice of apocalypse it had neared. The outcome rested on an individual who felt overlooked and was outranked by the other 2. A single vote, a moment of unexpected logic, and a trust in his intuition tipped the scales against the entirety of the strategic nuclear arsenal. Fact 3. The failure of one lighter altered Fidel Castro's destiny. In August of 1956, he was making preparations for the attack on the Moncada barracks, which was the initial armed operation of his movement. The truck driver, tasked with signaling the commencement of the assault, was to use a lighter as a prearranged signal. However, the lighter did not work. In the tense darkness, the signal was not transmitted, leading to a lack of reaction from some combatants and disorganized actions from others. Consequently, the operation was unsuccessful, with numerous individuals losing their lives or being apprehended. Castro miraculously survived and was subsequently imprisoned. This very setback, stemming from a common household issue, later served as his political leverage. The "history will absolve me" proceedings established him as a national icon of defiance. What was intended as a defeat and a conclusion transformed into a commencement due to a single non-functional lighter. Fact 4. In June of 1914, Archduke Franz Ferdinand's arrival in Sarajevo did not unfold as planned. Multiple assassination attempts were unsuccessful. Bombs failed to explode and bullets missed. Feeling irritated and weary, he opted to alter his itinerary and visit the hospital to see those who had been hurt. The driver, however, was unaware of the revised route. By making an incorrect turn, the procession inadvertently ended up on Franz Joseph Street. There, near a cafe, stood Gavrilo Princip, one of the plotters, who was confused. He had stopped for a snack and had lost hope of achieving his goal. Princip made no effort to conceal himself. He simply emerged, spotted the vehicle carrying the target, and fired 2 shots. The demise of the Crown Prince initiated a chain reaction leading to the outbreak of World War I. These events stemmed from a mistaken turn, the chauffeur's absence of a radio, and a cheese sandwich that prevented Princip from departing. Fact 5. During 1943, the American Army was planning a covert operation to seize the Italian island of Pantelleria. To draw enemy attention away from the actual invasion, British intelligence suggested a surprisingly straightforward ploy: to deposit a body with fake documents near the Spanish coast. The operation was given the code name Operation Mincemeat. The body of a homeless man who had died of poisoning was utilized for this purpose. He was assigned a fabricated identity as Major William Martin, a Royal Navy officer supposedly carrying plans for an invasion of Greece. These documents, intentionally concealed carelessly within a diplomatic brief, were obtained by the Nazis via Spanish officials who were sympathetic to their cause. The German command was deceived. Consequently, the primary forces of the Wehrmacht were shifted towards the Balkans, and the real landing in Sicily occurred with very few casualties. A single anonymous individual, whose physical characteristics happened to match, proved instrumental in a significant shift during the Mediterranean campaign. Had the Spanish forensic pathologist been slightly more observant, the deception might not have succeeded. Fact 6. In the year 1917, the revolutionary vessel Aurora narrowly avoided breaking its anchor due to a malfunctioning Kingston valve, a system used for flooding the ship's compartments. A technical issue nearly necessitated the crew's evacuation. Nevertheless, engineers succeeded in sealing the leak using available materials. Within days, this same ship would fire an unloaded shot, acting as the signal for the assault on the Winter Palace. The cannon itself was symbolic, lacking actual ammunition, and the crew was unsure of the gravity of the events. Yet, the shot occurred because the Aurora remained docked. Had the Kingston valve failed to cooperate and the ship been sent for repairs, the signal would not have been given, potentially jeopardizing or postponing the attack. A technical aspect played a role in the political drama. The commander of the ship, Nikolai Kolomaitsev, later commented on this irony, stating, "We ourselves did not fully understand what we had started then." Seventh fact. Henry VIII, the person responsible for sparking England's religious revolution, reached this pivotal moment due to a straightforward romantic interest. His pursuit of Anne Boleyn was thwarted when the Pope denied the request for a divorce from Catherine of Aragon. Discussions spanned several years. One day in the year 1531, the Pope's representative encountered an issue. His carriage's axle broke, leaving him stranded on a rural road. This incident postponed a scheduled meeting with the king. Henry, feeling vexed and furious, signed a decree that for the first time declared the English Church separate from Rome. This decree was initially conceived as a tactic to exert influence. However, after a few months, once the initial anger faded, reversing the situation became impossible, as the sequence of actions had gained momentum. The delay of a single envoy led to the commencement of the Anglican period, characterized by executions, the seizure of monastic properties, and a reshuffled power dynamic across Europe. Fact number 8. During the autumn of 1944, within the Ardennes forests, a German signal soldier was unable to change his radio frequency in time because his fingers were frozen. His encrypted dispatch was sent over an old channel and was picked up by Allied reconnaissance. The communication revealed an unusual level of activity in the rear of the Wehrmacht. Substantial convoys were observed moving toward the front lines, contrary to the officially announced lull. This intercepted intelligence enabled the U.S. command to deduce that an offensive was in the making. Within 2 days, the Ardennes offensive was set to commence, marking the Third Reich's final significant push in the West. The well-prepared forces encountered the enemy in a manner distinct from how they would have if the assault had been unexpected. Historians continue to discuss the degree of importance of this particular dispatch. The operator himself, 20 years later in his memoirs, stated, "My hand was unresponsive. It was too cold to press precisely." A single instance of physical frailty amidst the December snow caused the entire battle's disposition to change direction. Ninth fact. In the year 1938, the British Prime Minister, Neville Chamberlain, came back from Munich with a document signed by Adolf Hitler. He announced from the platform, "I have brought peace for our time." This paper, which could have been a historical joke, indeed became one. However, had it not been for one incident, things might have unfolded differently. A day before his journey, Hitler nearly called off the meeting due to a fever. Doctors believed he had a sore throat. Staff members at his headquarters urged to reschedule the meeting with the British delegation. Yet, the Führer himself, showing annoyance and obstinacy, declared his unwillingness to seem weak. He met with Chamberlain in a room below ground level with scarves around him. The talks took place in an unusual atmosphere. One participant was coughing, while the other kept agreeing. This unexpected sickness hindered the precise agreement on details. Consequently, instead of firm statements regarding Czechoslovakia's borders, the protocol contained ambiguous assurances. This later enabled the accord to be seen as a betrayal instead of a deal. The high temperature and the leader's stubbornness were the delicate thread upon which the effort to avert disaster rested. Fact 10. In the year 1865, actor John Wilkes Booth was a passenger on a train traveling from Washington to Richmond. His presence in that specific train car was unplanned. He received his ticket due to a swap with an associate. While en route, he overheard two servicemen discussing a possible visit by Abraham Lincoln to Ford's Theater on the upcoming Friday. These remarks became the catalyst. Booth already possessed radical beliefs, but the point at which he decided to act was precisely during this journey. He was in the opportune location to learn the pertinent information. Just a few days later, he commenced preparations for the assassination, procuring a pistol and a knife and devising his escape plan. The entire sequence of occurrences, from selecting the theater to the moment of the shot, was triggered by an accidental boarding of the train. Although Booth's concepts were not born at that time, it was this chance occurrence that provided them with a concrete form of action. The president, who maintained his schedule, and the actor, who found himself in the incorrect car, altered the political direction of the United States. Fact 11. In the course of the Russo-Japanese War, one telegram, transmitted with a mistake, changed the direction of the entire Tsushima operation. In April of 1905, Admiral Rozhestvensky anticipated reinforcements from Allied vessels and asked for the enemy fleet's coordinates to be confirmed. The telegraphist in Shanghai, working under contract, mistakenly indicated the longitude with swapped numbers, 73 instead of 37. For a few hours, the squadron sailed in an incorrect direction, found itself in an unfavorable position, and, due to complete fog, missed the chance to attack the Japanese ships before they could reorganize. A digit might appear to be a mere technical touch. Yet in naval combat, where accuracy decides everything, such a trifle signifies a front-line displacement of tens of kilometers. The squadron got confused, signalmen lost sight of each other in the fog, and the Japanese took the lead. The Tsushima battle turned into a disaster. And it all stemmed from a single human error. And it occurred not on the ship's deck, but at the telegraph key in a faraway Asian office. Fact 12. In 1921, in Prague, chemistry faculty students accidentally synthesized a substance that would later be called sarin. The research was conducted as part of a search for new pesticides, and one of the samples was exceptionally volatile. A laboratory assistant who inhaled the fumes lost consciousness. The reaction was considered interesting and documented in a report. This report, 2 years later, came into the possession of German industrialists working with military organizations. This initiated a series of developments leading to the creation of next-generation chemical warfare agents. The key point is that the initial report only reached the Bayer archive because another document was mistakenly sent instead. The paperwork for fertilizers ended up in the military materials department. If the envelopes had not been confused, sarin could have remained a laboratory oddity. All of modern chemical warfare might have proceeded differently.
A single folder, a single archival error, and the sequence of fatal decisions started to unfold.
Fact 13. In the year 1898, French author Émile Zola dispatched an open letter named J'accuse to President Félix Faure. This letter was in support of Captain Alfred Dreyfus, a Jewish individual who had been convicted of espionage. There was a possibility that the letter would not be delivered. A typesetter at the Louvre print shop mistakenly interchanged pages, placing Zola's piece in the morning paper instead of the evening one as originally intended. Government ministers and elected officials encountered the newspaper over their breakfast. This timing had a dramatic impact, akin to an explosion. Lawmakers began contacting newsrooms, igniting public anger during the busiest part of the day's political schedule. If the article had appeared in the evening, it would have been too late for discussion in the parliamentary session. The typographical mistake amplified the letter's political significance. Dreyfus himself was on Devil's Island at that moment, unaware of these developments. The fate of his case was changed by an accidental editorial slip-up, which transformed an individual's protest into a significant historical event.
Fact 14. In the year 1963, John Fitzgerald Kennedy traveled to Dallas, disregarding security advice to call off the visit. This was due to a dispute between his staff and local politicians, as declining the visit would have been seen as an offense. Yet, the presidential motorcade's path was confirmed hastily. The original plan was to proceed along the broad Main Street, but due to unfinished road repairs, the route was rerouted to Elm Street, a constricted segment with a sharp right-angle turn. This caused the procession to decelerate, placing the motorcade directly in the line of sight from the warehouse window where Lee Harvey Oswald fired. Experts continue to discuss the feasibility of a shot while in motion, with the consensus leaning towards impossibility. Nevertheless, it was this alteration of the route that provided the killer with an opportunity. A bureaucratic delay within the road department, a single unapproved street usage permit, and the narrative of the United States took a different turn.
Fact 15. In July of 1942, in the village of Osovtsi, close to Brest, civilians were being evacuated. The Red Army Command intended to mine the bridge across the Bug to slow down the Wehrmacht's advance. A sapper named Sergeant Dvornikov mistakenly installed a charge near the bank instead of on the central support. His fellow soldiers fixed the installation plan, but failed to remove the old detonator. When German tanks moved across the bridge one morning, both charges detonated. This triggered a chain reaction, destroying not only the bridge, but also a pontoon crossing and an ammunition depot on the other side. The resulting explosion obliterated the command post of a division preparing to attack Brest. This engineering mistake caused a 3-day disruption to the offensive. Historians later studied this event, suggesting that without this pause, German forces might have linked up with the southern flank of Army Group Center, potentially altering the course of the Eastern Front offensive.
16th fact. During Napoleon's Egyptian campaign in 1799, a French soldier was excavating a trench near the Rashid fortress. His shovel hit a stone. This stone was a black basalt block bearing 3 inscriptions: hieroglyphic, Demotic, and ancient Greek. The officer in charge deemed the stone potentially valuable to academics and dispatched it to Cairo. Thus, the Rosetta Stone was discovered, providing the means to decode ancient Egyptian script. What's particularly intriguing is that the soldier had been scheduled for kitchen duties the day prior, but he exchanged shifts with a fellow soldier at the very last minute. If he hadn't been present at that location, the stone might have remained buried in the sand for many more decades. Additionally, the British nearly obliterated it in Alexandria, believing it to be a component of their defenses. Its preservation was due to the Greek lettering on the block, which a lieutenant identified. An accidental guard rotation and rudimentary language skills preserved the artifact that revolutionized historical scholarship.
Fact 17. In 1860, Abraham Lincoln, a candidate for U.S. president, scored a key political point because of a typesetter's technical mistake. A speech he was giving in Illinois, planned as a regular campaign talk, had its text sent to newspapers in the Midwest by his assistants. In one paragraph, there was a plain, uninspired phrase concerning the moral vagueness of slavery. The typesetter incorrectly placed a dash and a comma, leading to the impactful wording, "A nation cannot be half free, half slave." This expression caused a stir in newsrooms. It sounded like a rallying cry and was promptly cited. Lincoln first didn't grasp why people were seeking clarification, but upon viewing the newspaper version, he chose to retain the phrasing. Consequently, a layout error became a central theme of his campaign, aiding and rallying those against slavery. Occasionally, the era's spirit influences grammar via an unintended key press. Fact 18. In the course of World War II, the U.S. Army experimented with what were known as flying tanks, light, tracked vehicles designed for parachute deployment. The initiative was named Half Nelson and was, in essence, destined for failure from its inception. The machinery sustained damage during landings, the descent path lacked control, and the airborne troops frequently failed to locate the tanks post-arrival. Nevertheless, on one occasion, a tank deviated from its intended path and landed close to a German convoy in France. The resulting shockwave obliterated 2 trucks laden with munitions. The German forces interpreted this as the commencement of a substantial airborne operation and initiated a withdrawal, vacating a fortified hamlet that Allied forces had struggled to conquer. This facilitated a swift advance and the establishment of a position in an area designated for breaking through the Siegfried Line. Subsequently, this event was characterized as a fortunate mishap. Further tank drops were discontinued, and the project was terminated. However, a single failure, attributed to an erroneous wind assessment, furnished the Army with a strategic strongpoint at the expense of one scrap unit and an unoccupied cockpit. Fact 19. In the year 1991, a coup attempt in Moscow nearly failed because a factory machine broke down. When troops were being deployed into the city, a tank battalion from the Lublino factory was scheduled to proceed to Red Square. One of the tractors, bringing up the rear of the convoy, stalled on a turn near Novokuznetskaya Street, thus obstructing the movement of the rest. The command was in a difficult situation. Bypassing was not an option due to closed arches, and they couldn't locate a tow truck. Consequently, the machinery remained stationary for nearly 90 minutes, and the announcement of communication seizure was delayed. Within this time frame, hundreds of individuals were able to assemble at the White House, and the radio station Echo of Moscow continued its broadcasts. This period proved sufficient for organizing civilian resistance, setting up road blockades, and initiating the night's defense. The failure of the Soviet military tractor's engine contributed to the downfall of the coup attempt. The driver later stated in an interview, "The fuel pump simply froze. We are accustomed to such issues in the Army." However, on this particular occasion, the usual equipment failure altered the nation's trajectory. Fact 20. In the year 1986, as preparations for the Challenger launch were underway, engineers at Morton Thiokol, the firm tasked with the solid rocket boosters, alerted NASA to the dangers posed by low temperatures. Their fax, however, was placed among documents designated as urgent and was not noticed until the morning briefing. Moreover, the lack of an electronic tracking system meant there was no record of who had read the document or when. On the day of the launch, the temperature fell below zero, leading to the hardening of the rubber seals. A gas breakthrough happened during liftoff. The shuttle exploded 73 seconds after its ascent. All 7 astronauts lost their lives. However, this disaster might have been avoided. If the fax had been handed over in person, the launch would have been called off. A single document, a single unmade call, and the disaster occurred. It was a situation of chance close to negligence, a technical slip-up, but at its core, it was the paper being in the wrong stack. Occasionally, what determines destiny is not the knowledge itself, but the timing and the recipient of that information.
Fact 21st. In the year 1906, during the San Francisco earthquake, one of the initial fire outbreaks occurred not due to building collapses, but because of an attempt to brew coffee. One gentleman, impatient for the gas supply to resume, opted to use a spirit stove. The flame ignited a fallen tablecloth, the fire then moved to a wooden cupboard and subsequently to the wall. This might appear to be a common household mishap. Yet, it was from this particular apartment that the fire reached Green Street and subsequently the city's core. Amidst the ensuing disorder, prompt containment of the fire's progression proved impossible. Furthermore, military personnel, in their effort to establish a fire break, detonated several structures using dynamite, which, through the resulting shockwave, inadvertently hastened the fire's advance. The city was consumed by flames for 3 days, claiming the lives of more than 3,000 individuals, with the central district being almost entirely obliterated. And it all stemmed from a simple attempt to make coffee in a devastated building. Occasionally, the persistence of a morning routine during an extreme event initiates a chain of events that becomes unstoppable.
Fact 22nd. In 1916, in Flanders, German officer Oskar von Wasmund stepped on a metal can during a trench patrol. Believing it to be a discarded mine, he jumped back, slipped, and injured his ankle. He was moved to the infirmary the next day, and a different commander took his place. This replacement officer, lacking knowledge of the defensive specifics, exposed a flank that had been deemed safe. 2 days later, Allied troops carried out a probing attack and coincidentally found this area. They broke through the defense and secured a favorable position, initiating a successful advance on this part of the front. The accidental ankle injury from an empty can became the critical weak point in the German defenses. Wasmund later recorded in his diary, "I was gone for a day and it all collapsed. I hope it was a sardine can, not destiny." Even a perfect military apparatus relies on minor details, such as a piece of rusted tin.
Fact 23rd. During the autumn of 1905 in St. Petersburg, writer Leonid Andreyev was submitting the corrected version of his story, Judas Iscariot, to the printing press. The printing house mistakenly swapped boxes of documents, and instead of his manuscript, they sent the manuscript of a young author that had previously gone without a response. This is how Alexander Kuprin's story, The Garnet Bracelet, was first published. The printing process had already started when the mistake was discovered. However, Andreyev, upon learning of the accidental publication, was thrilled and requested that the situation remain unchanged. The story, which was not meant to be released, eventually became a masterpiece of Russian prose from the Silver Age. Kuprin later recounted that he had almost given up hope, and the letter approving his work arrived on the very day he was planning to abandon his writing career. The mix-up at the printing press, caused by the warehouse clerk's birthday and his haste to get home, altered 2 lives simultaneously. One career was launched and another earned recognition. This mistake resulted in no dismissals.
Fact 24th. In the year 1937, while constructing the Seelow Heights in Germany, land surveyor Krauss made a mistake with the ground level readings. He carried over numbers from a summer survey onto a winter plan without accounting for seasonal soil expansion. This led to a misleading perception of the plateau's elevation, and defenses at a crucial eastern front point were constructed about 2 meters lower than the ideal viewing angle. In 1945, this specific point became the site of the Soviet advance. German artillery emplacements, constructed based on the winter measurements, were unable to target lower areas. The Red Army moved through what was known as the Dead Flank, a sector the German High Command believed was impossible to attack. This was all due to a single, rushed geodesic chart. An error overlooked during winter led to an attack being missed in spring. Wars are sometimes decided not on the battlefield, but when someone looks at figures from a previous year's plan and thinks, "That's good enough." Fact 25th. In the spring of 1942, a German officer temporarily stationed his headquarters in a school library in the Dutch town of Enschede. While inspecting the premises, he discovered a cabinet that was locked but lacked a key. Suspecting that radio transmitters might be concealed within, he instructed that it be forced open the next day. However, during the night, a young person from the resistance entered the building to remove his cousin's hidden diary from that specific cabinet. He was concerned that the writings could reveal the whereabouts of Jews in hiding. Later, this diary served as the initial account of Anne Frank's destiny, preceding the publication of the main work. The young man was named Joop van Gelder, and his name is rarely cited. His intervention not only preserved some of the manuscripts, but also enabled later comparisons of different versions and verification of the text's genuineness. Joop himself did not survive to witness the publication. He perished in July of that year. Yet, had the cabinet been opened that morning, the narrative of the Holocaust's most renowned young eyewitness could have been lost before its inception.
Fact 26. In July of 1914, just days before the outbreak of the First World War, Belgian railway employees went on an indefinite strike. Their demands were purely economic: higher salaries and fewer night shifts. Nevertheless, it was this very strike that caused the rerouting of a German reserve corps intended to pass through Belgium during a swift offensive. Because of a lack of train cars and closed stations, the relocation took double the planned time. As a result, the French were able to regroup, and the Battle of the Marne led to the German advance being stopped. General von Moltke later stated in his report, "It wasn't soldiers who stopped us, but schedules." The strike, which had no political ties, became a factor in the strategic failure of the entire campaign. Even though the workers themselves did not know the outcome, their decision to stop working effectively moved the front line hundreds of kilometers. Fact 27. When a young doctor, Oliver Holmes, was delivering a baby in Boston in 1829, he accidentally mixed up solution containers. He used a weak alcohol solution instead of an antiseptic. The child and mother survived, unlike other mothers who passed away from childbed fever in the same hospital. This event greatly impacted Holmes, leading him to systematically investigate the relationship between cleanliness and death rates. He eventually became a pioneer in advocating for hand hygiene and obstetrics. Yet, the accidental selection of a flask provided the spark for his scientific curiosity. He later stated in a lecture, "Knowledge came from a bottle, but not the one I intended to use." While Holmes's ideas were initially dismissed, they were instrumental in inspiring the young Joseph Lister, who then established antiseptic surgery. A single misplaced solution on a worn stand in the delivery room's corner marked the beginning of a medical revolution. Fact 28. In the year 1926, during a scientific conference on quantum physics held in Berlin, Albert Einstein narrowly avoided missing his scheduled presentation. The cause was a common one. His watch had stopped during the night, leading him to wake up 40 minutes past his intended time. In his haste to get ready, he mistakenly took the wrong folder. Instead of the prepared speech containing his latest calculations regarding photon theory, he had with him notes pertaining to the general theory of relativity. Upon discovering this error while already at the podium, Einstein opted for improvisation. He commenced a discourse on the potential effects of gravity on the frequency of light. This portion of his talk, delivered without the use of mathematical formulas, proved accessible even to students and emerging physicists. Subsequently, one of the audience members, Hermann Bondi, would build upon these very remarks to advance a field of study that ultimately resulted in the formulation of the cosmological horizon concept. It is noteworthy that Einstein himself did not place significant value on this particular address. He later conveyed in a letter to a friend, "I was reading the wrong material, but I believe I said more." Occasionally, significant breakthroughs originate from a simple mix-up of belongings. Fact 29. In the year 1939, at the onset of World War II, Poland continued to anticipate assistance from France and Great Britain. The government's plan for evacuation involved departing from Warsaw in a Lockheed aircraft heading towards Romania. Nevertheless, on the night preceding the planned departure, the pilot declined to fly, citing adverse weather conditions, specifically engine issues and unupdated charts. The actual reason was the pilot's dissatisfaction with the runway state. The unavoidable delay of one night necessitated a rushed alteration of the flight path, and a ground convoy carrying documents and valuables was subject to bombing. The Polish intelligence archive, detailing its agent network throughout Europe, was among the lost materials. These documents were subsequently acquired by the SS. Moreover, they facilitated the exposure of clandestine operations in the Netherlands and Belgium. A single decision to forego a night flight, motivated by ordinary prudence, resulted not only in the loss of the archive, but also placed thousands of individuals in occupied territories at risk. Occasionally, the destiny of underground movements hinges on a single meteorological forecast.
Fact 30th. English sailor John James Robertson received an assignment to the vessel Waverley in 1896. However, he switched places with a friend at the last minute to visit his ailing mother. The Waverley sailed and, within a day, struck an iceberg near Newfoundland. The majority of the crew died. Robertson, staying on land, entered the Port Authority. There, 2 years later, he assisted in averting a catastrophe aboard another ship, the Titanic. Upon observing a consignment of unstable batteries in the cargo manifest, he advocated for enhanced insulation and arranged for their separate shipment. While the loss of the Titanic in 1912 was unavoidable, a part of the cargo that might have exacerbated a fire in the ship's holds was eliminated due to Robertson's action. A single visit to his unwell mother in the 1890s preserved an individual who would later make a contribution to a matter that remained obscure for an extended period. The chance selection of a voyage initiated a convoluted sequence of outcomes, wherein certain calamities resulted in the partial rescue of others.
Fact 31. During a reception in 1905 with the British Prime Minister Arthur Balfour, a guest, Emre Lakatos, a young Hungarian chemist, accidentally spilled wine on the politician's sleeve. Seeking to rectify the situation, he initiated a conversation where he brought up new experiments concerning the synthesis of saltpeter from the air. Balfour became interested in this subject, and a week later, he arranged a meeting for Lakatos with representatives from the military-industrial complex. Following this encounter, a decision was made to invest in laboratories. These laboratories, through a series of subcontractors, eventually financed the research conducted by Fritz Haber. The outcome was the ammonia synthesis method, which became fundamental for the production of both fertilizers and explosives. Millions of tons of output, for both civilian and military purposes, stemmed from a sequence that began with a spot on a coat and an ill-timed comment. Without that awkward moment, Lakatos would likely not have become central to Britain's scientific establishment. And without his involvement, Haber himself might have missed his opportunity. Occasionally, a drop of wine can be the source from which conflicts and bountiful harvests originate. Fact 32nd. In April of 1999, NATO aircraft attacked the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, leading to an international scandal. The strike resulted in the deaths of 3 journalists and injuries to dozens more. The official explanation cited an error in the coordinates. This explanation was truthful, as the coordinates were sourced from an outdated CIA database that mistakenly listed the embassy as a logistics firm's office linked to the Serbian military. The officer responsible for targeting utilized a paper atlas from 1995 because the digital system was overloaded and the server had crashed. The order was issued at that exact moment. It was later discovered that the atlas was stored in his vehicle and was missing a page. He had reprinted the relevant section and confused the address. This sequence of ordinary events, a crashed server, a missing page, and the exhaustion of the night shift crew, culminated in a diplomatic crisis between Beijing and Washington.
A single sheet, a single button, and a geographic location designated as a target represent the coincidences that spark historical events in the 21st century.
ファクト33番 General Toyoyuki Yamashita received a death sentence from an American military tribunal in September 1945. The charges were related to crimes his subordinates committed in Manila. The conviction was based on a telegram that, as communication officers recalled, Yamashita did not send himself. A duty staff officer typed it on the adjutant's command while Yamashita was in a different city. The telegram contained the phrase, "Hold positions by all means." Prosecutors later interpreted this as an indirect instruction allowing for cruelty. It was later discovered that the order was a copy of a prior instruction, and the word "all" was mistakenly included in this version due to an automatic template insertion. The electromechanical machine used at the headquarters had a memory for short phrases. A single wrong keystroke made with the wrong finger made the commander appear complicit in atrocities. The wording error preserved in the documents sealed the case's fate. Even though this was raised on appeal, the procedural aspect prevailed over sound reasoning.
Fact 34th. In 1960, Nikita Khrushchev's visit to the UN saw one of the most well-known Cold War events, the shoe-banging incident. Officially, Khrushchev used his shoe to protest the Philippine delegates' remarks. Less commonly known, however, is how he came to have the shoe. The truth is, Khrushchev wore new shoes that day, and they were causing him discomfort. He removed one shoe beneath his table. Meanwhile, a UN staff member passing by accidentally knocked it with a paper cart, sending the shoe rolling under the speaker's platform. Khrushchev, unable to locate his shoe under the table, in his annoyance, picked up a backup shoe he always carried due to past fractures from the 30s. It was an old, soft shoe. This is the shoe he waved. Consequently, the image of the Soviet leader's aggressive stance wasn't a planned act of shock value, but rather a result of a sore foot, ill-fitting footwear, and a habit of keeping a spare shoe handy. The iconic image that made history originated from a simple, personal, daily annoyance. Fact 35th. In the year 1862, during the American Civil War, telegraph operator Jonathan Meade, stationed at General McClellan's command post, inadvertently misdirected a cable. This resulted in a coded dispatch detailing plans for a northwestward advance being sent back to Washington rather than to its intended recipient at the front. Southern agents intercepted and decoded the telegram, which enabled the Confederate Army to set up an ambush at South Mountain Pass. Historians continue to discuss whether this error stemmed from exhaustion, a technical mix-up, or negligence. However, it is documented that Meade was operating a dual communication line for the first time on that particular day. The cable misconnection on the switchboard persisted for a mere 90 seconds, yet this brief period was sufficient to undermine the campaign's overall strategy. The ambush at South Mountain caused a 10-day delay in the Union's offensive, affording the Confederate forces an opportunity to reorganize and evade being surrounded. The Battle of Antietam, which later became the war's most brutal engagement, might have been averted. This all occurred due to an incorrect lever manipulation. Fact 36th. A private dinner was held in London during the summer of 1985. The gathering included personnel from British intelligence, ex-diplomats, and a few academics from Oxford. The subject of discussion was emerging risks within the Arctic region. One professor, struggling to discern accents, mistakenly interpreted the word Russian as racist. Consequently, he began speaking about domestic political developments in Britain, moving further away from the planned discussion. His mix-up elicited nervous laughter. However, an agent from MI6 suddenly picked up on a remark concerning the increasing focus on climate windows. It was discovered that Soviet vessels were more frequently operating in the Arctic Ocean outside of their usual season, likely to test navigation under novel weather conditions. This brief remark triggered a sequence of analytical assessments, within which the terms weather window and ice corridor first appeared. These terms later formed the foundation for defining the Northern Sea Route as a geopolitical issue. If the professor had not misheard and had stayed on subject, the intelligence services could have overlooked an early indicator. Occasionally, even a mishearing can initiate a new strategic doctrine. Fact 37th. In the year 1925, at the Krasny Putilovets factory in Leningrad, a malfunction occurred at the electrical board. A voltage fluctuation caused a transformer to burn out, resulting in the Tsech, where experimental radio transmitters were assembled, being without electricity for a full day. Design engineer Alexander Popov, a namesake of the renowned inventor, utilized the idle time to examine signal stabilization system interference. Surprisingly, it was during these involuntary hours that he devised a method to suppress echo in wired systems, a solution that enabled a sharp increase in communication distance. This scheme was subsequently implemented in government communication lines and exported to Eastern Europe. Popov himself confessed that he wouldn't have investigated the interference had the equipment not broken down. A single technical failure, triggered by basic overheating, led to a technological advancement. The irony lies in the fact that the transformer failed because of an attempt to power a homemade heater. Heat, by costing an hour of work, facilitated millions of kilometers of communication. Fact number 38. In the year 1925, while shooting the film Battleship Potemkin, director Sergei Eisenstein asked to replace the location for a crowd scene on a staircase. The original spot in Odessa was taken over for military drills. The second largest staircase near Primorsky Boulevard was selected as a replacement. This necessary alteration, approved just one day before shooting, led to a frame that would later enter the history of world cinema as one of the most potent visual symbols of violence and tragedy. The characteristics of the new staircase, its perspective, steep slope, and open sky, enabled the creation of a feeling of despair and motion. If the shooting had stayed in the original place, the scene could have looked commonplace. In this way, a change in scenery, prompted by an accidental military timetable, resulted in the creation of a cinematic language that impacted Coppola, Spielberg, and numerous other directors. Occasionally, a global masterpiece is born not from a plan, but from a garrison schedule. Fact 39th. The initial plan for 1961 was for German Titov, not Yuri Gagarin, to travel into space. The Vostok program was developed concurrently for both potential astronauts, with the final selection undecided until the last possible moment. However, a day before the scheduled liftoff, Titov experienced a fever, a result of a minor viral infection contracted during a swimming session. Medical professionals opted to avoid any potential hazards. Gagarin, designated as the backup, was immediately isolated and readied for the mission. He recounted learning of his selection only the night before the flight. The mission, a pivotal event for humankind, was contingent upon an ill-advised plunge into cold water. Titov eventually made his space journey several months later, but his place in historical records became secondary. Had his immune system not faltered just before, the iconic exclamation, "Let's go," might have been uttered by someone else. Fact 40. In 1961, during the Berlin crisis, Soviet tanks were positioned at Checkpoint Charlie, facing American Pershing tanks, poised for a potential clash. The tension escalated with each passing hour. A peculiar event then took place. An American tank operator, while changing lanes, miscalculated his vehicle size and bumped into an adjacent tank, producing a grating sound of metal. Soviet observers perceived this action as an attack preparation and started readying their units. The situation was diffused by the timely intervention of a translator present nearby. He clarified that it was a mechanic's mistake. This event was subsequently documented in American records as the mirror incident, attributed to a side mirror making contact with the armor of another tank. This minor mechanical contact nearly resulted in a nuclear standoff. A single incorrect lever movement could have made the prospect of perishing in a worldwide blaze alarmingly tangible. Fact 41. In the year 1797, Joseph Bonaparte, who was Napoleon's older brother, arrived in Rome as a French envoy. He was tasked with agreeing on the conditions for the upcoming occupation of the Papal States. However, upon his arrival, he was held due to a malaria outbreak. Doctors mandated a quarantine. As a result, negotiations were carried out via intermediaries. One of these intermediaries, a Jesuit priest named Giuseppe Moretto, included a statement in the documents about the spiritual authority's sovereignty over the citizen's conscience. This clause later served as justification for Pius VII when he declined to crown Napoleon in Paris, leading to the well-known self-coronation event. A single bout of fever and the necessary replacement of the diplomat changed the planned outcome. Instead of the customary ritual, France observed the general placing the crown on his own head. This action represented a separation from the church and the start of a new model of authority. It all stemmed from a mosquito bite and elevated body temperature. Fact 42nd. In 1923, as Hitler planned the Beer Hall Putsch, he expected General Erich Ludendorff's support. However, on the day of the planned action, Ludendorff's car malfunctioned, causing him to arrive at the gathering 40 minutes past the scheduled time. Hitler was already improvising, attempting to maintain control of the room when Ludendorff entered, believing it was all a coordinated plan. His reputation lent a brief period of legitimacy to the demonstration, but this delay altered the entire timeline. The Putschists marched into the streets at a time when police patrols had been alerted and had reorganized. This is the reason the confrontation at the Feldherrnhalle resulted in bloodshed. The ironic twist is that Ludendorff declined to ride a horse because of rheumatism worsened by a past military injury. The car, failing to start that morning, became a crucial element in a sequence of events where a 30-minute delay acted as a verdict. Fact 43rd. In 1945, American soldiers entered a hastily abandoned death camp in the German city of Ohrdruf. General Eisenhower, their commander, arrived 2 days later, deeply disturbed by the initial reports. When offered a photo opportunity in front of the barracks during his visit, the photojournalist failed to load the camera with film. Eisenhower, angered and appalled by the scene, declined to repeat the posing. He instead issued an order to promptly gather a delegation of senators and journalists, stating his intent that no scoundrel should be able to claim this never happened. Although the photograph was not captured, this led to one of the most impactful propaganda efforts by the Allies. American newspapers published eyewitness testimonies, and the Ohrdruf newsreel became the first official footage from the camps. The photographer's error initiated a crucial decision, transforming an impromptu visit into a public indictment. The unused camera served as a catalyst for the historical documentation of the Holocaust. Fact 44th. In the year 1909, Russian physicist Pyotr Lebedev was due to speak at the International Congress in Budapest about the electromagnetic pressure of light. However, on the eve of his presentation, he went onto the hotel balcony, slipped on wet tiles, and damaged his ligaments. Limping, he could not attend the session and handed the text of his report to a colleague, the Hungarian scientist Zsigmond Bohr. Bohr, after delivering the speech, on his own initiative, added a hypothesis at the conclusion about the possibility of using light pressure in systems for moving objects in a vacuum. These remarks, written down by stenographers, ended up in a compilation where the report was already credited to both scientists. It was this note that inspired a young student, Hermann Oberth, to make early drafts of photoelectric engines. Oberth later became the mentor of Wernher von Braun. Put simply, one rainy balcony, one twisted ankle, and one foreign addition to someone else's text marked the first step toward the concept of a solar sail. Fact 45th. During the autumn of 1921, the port of Baku implemented a quarantine. The reason was a cholera outbreak affecting the dock workers, resulting in the suspension of ship reception. On that very day, the research vessel Mikhail Lomonosov was set to commence its journey to the Caspian Sea for the purpose of gathering information on oil deposits. The unavoidable week-long delay provided the team with an opportunity to utilize their spare time for examining magnetic anomalies in the vicinity of Absheron, a standard task previously deferred. While conducting this work, a sequence of geophysical disturbances was detected, pointing to a novel type of geological layer. Soon after departing from the port, the most significant oil field, subsequently designated Oil Rocks, was found. Without this sanitary directive, the expedition would probably have overlooked this find. A single vial of infected water modified the route of the scientific vessel and the economic landscape of the 20th century. Fact 46. In the year 1970, tests were carried out in the USA on the ARPANET computer network, which is the ancestor of the Internet. The task was to send the word login from one computer to another. Engineer Charlie Klein entered the letters L and O, but at that point, the system hung. The server fell and the connection broke. After an hour and a half, it was restarted and the attempt succeeded. Nevertheless, it was precisely these first two letters, LO, that were registered as the first transmitted text in the history of the Internet. The irony is that LO can be seen as the start of the word look, or even as an exclamation, LO, begin to look. Years later, this snippet became a symbol of the beginning of the digital era. The initial failure, caused by a common buffer overload, proved to be not a downfall, but a historical launch. An error that became the emblem of an entire civilization. Fact 47. During the spring of 1903 in St. Petersburg, as preparations were underway for an attack on Minister of Internal Affairs Vyacheslav Pleve, terrorists from the Socialist Revolutionary Party intended to deploy custom-made grenades. However, the militants discovered they had no fuses of the necessary kind. A contact person, Nikolai Kalyuzhin, a student of technology, opted to use a sample from an earlier delivery that possessed a minor threading flaw. This specific flaw resulted in the projectile altering its path when thrown, detonating beneath the carriage's wheels rather than within its body. The minister perished, but the coachman survived and could recount the place and time of the grenade's launch. This enabled the police to more swiftly identify the masterminds. The subsequent crackdown exposed cells not only in the capital, but also in Kyiv, Tula, and Kazan. One threaded projection on a brass shell, discarded due to time constraints, served as the crucial clue that led to the dismantling of the entire operation. The assassination succeeded, yet the unintended explosion angle triggered a series of setbacks. Fact 48. In the year 1919, in Paris, while the Treaty of Versailles was being drafted, Arthur Norton, a translator for the British delegation, incorrectly translated a phrase from the French preliminary document. The original text spoke of the right of nations to self-determination within their historical boundaries, but he conveyed it as within the scope of possible territorial balance. During the proceedings on the disposition of the Sudetenland and the Teschen region, this particular phrasing became critical. The Americans sided with the British understanding. Consequently, the contested territories were allocated to Czechoslovakia, notwithstanding the claims put forth by Poland and Austria. In the ensuing years, this specific resolution would emerge as a persistent flashpoint of regional instability and serve as one of Hitler's justifications for annexing the Sudetenland in 1938. Norton later confessed to being rushed and failing to verify the draft. However, his expediency, driven by the prospect of cold roast beef at lunch and his skipped breakfast, initiated a new frontier, setting in motion the events of the 20th century. Fact 49. In the year 1947, an incident took place at London Heathrow Airport. A passenger arriving from Karachi was mistakenly given someone else's baggage, which was a large wooden box. Inside this box were samples of the smallpox virus, intended for study at the Institute of Tropical Medicine. The box was opened at the airport, and the staff, not understanding what was inside, left it in the lost property area. A few hours later, one of the employees became infected, and a disease outbreak spread across the district. This was the final outbreak of smallpox in the United Kingdom.
A mistake on the sorting belt caused by a missing label had a deadly impact. After this event, the labeling system for biological shipments was re-evaluated worldwide. An accidental piece of luggage, an incorrect label, a misplaced room, and the virus persisted in a place where it was believed to be defeated. Fact 50. In the Italian village of Montecatini during World War II, a local blacksmith, Giulio Perini, unintentionally severed a communication cable. He considered it abandoned and inactive as it was in the way of a cart. However, it was actually a reserve communication channel connecting the German division's command post with an artillery spotter. When American forces launched their offensive a few hours later, the fire adjustment failed because the coordinates could not be relayed. This enabled a tank column to maneuver around the firing zone and secure a commanding elevation. Perini later recounted to the wine steward, not knowing the scale of the impact. "The cutters were old. I nearly broke my teeth, but I severed it." The episode was noted in a report as local unidentified obstruction. A single curve of wire, acting as a barrier to a wheel, had a more significant impact than intelligence gathering or air support. Occasionally, victory in combat is secured by someone whose trade is shoeing horses. Fact 51. In the year 1966, Chinese physicist Liu Jin was carrying out an experiment focused on the controlled heating of a graphite rod within a research reactor situated close to Shanghai. The temperature sensor failed because of a factory defect present in one of the microchips. These microchips had been manufactured using outdated equipment and designs from the 1930s. The readings from the sensor showed an overheating condition, despite the fact that the actual temperature was within the normal parameters. Liu Jin immediately halted the experiment. Nevertheless, during his analysis of this mistake, he developed the concept for a new circuit design. Rather than monitoring the temperature, he suggested observing the variations in coolant density, a method that turned out to be more dependable and predictable. This methodology became the foundation for China's safety regulations for small reactors that were exported to African and Latin American countries. A minor malfunction resulting from poor soldering brought the experiment to a close, but simultaneously triggered a sequence of developments that contributed to the expansion of the export atomic sector. The incorrect reading was more beneficial than the accurate one. Fact 52. In the year 1922, in Bucharest, thieves robbed a postal train, seizing bags containing money and correspondence. Within the stolen mail was a sealed envelope carrying a complaint against a government official filed by an ordinary farmer. The intention was for this complaint to go unanswered, filed away in the archives. Yet, following the robbery, a portion of the letters was discovered in a suburban area, strewn across a field. The contents of one letter, inadvertently read at a local police precinct, were so striking and forthright that the official named within it was promptly called to the prosecutor's office. This marked the inaugural case of anti-corruption efforts in post-war Romania to gain public attention. The original letter was entered into the court proceedings as a document restored after unauthorized access. The peculiar twist of fate is that had the bag of complaints not been taken, no repercussions would have occurred. Occasionally, justice arrives not via the established legal route, but by the timely interception of a mail train. 53rd fact. In 1945, during the Berlin Offensive, a Red Army battalion came across a building listed as a museum on the map. They decided to bypass the structure, treating it as a non-military target. Nevertheless, an accidental shot fired from the rooftop forced the soldiers to go inside. It turned out to be an SS underground printing facility where counterfeit documents were being printed for officers to flee using false identities. Hundreds of ready-made passports were confiscated, with some already having pictures pasted in. This find was passed to counterintelligence, and it was these documents that led to the apprehension of many Nazis trying to conceal themselves. The fake identification papers served as crucial evidence. The soldiers later remarked that they had no intention of entering, noting, and there weren't any proper doors either. One shot from the roof was the trigger that exposed the deception.
Had it not occurred, numerous individuals might have disappeared into the post-war disorder using other people's names and life stories.
Fact 54th. In the year 1888, in London, amidst the panic over the Jack the Ripper killings, the police received an anonymous letter. This letter contained details of an upcoming attack. The letter seemed like a joke. It was written on cheap paper, the handwriting was shaky, and the date was incorrect. It was filed under false alarms. However, 3 days later, the events described in the letter occurred precisely as stated. The location, the weapon used, and even the detail about a red scarf around the victim's neck all matched. In a state of panic, an official who had read the letter ripped it out of its folder and attempted to discard it. It was at this precise moment that a photographer entered the room to take pictures of the correspondence for the archive. The photograph survived and was included in the investigation. This picture served as the initial piece of evidence in the effort to identify the handwriting and a potential author. The irony is that the original letter was destroyed, yet its accidentally made copy became a crucial document. The opportunity was incredibly slim, hinging on whether the technician entered the room 5 minutes earlier or later. The 55th fact. In the year 1822, a Congress of the Holy Alliance was held in Vienna. During this event, European powers aimed to devise the post-war arrangements for the continent. A protocol detailing the status of Sardinia and the navigation rights in the Adriatic Sea contained a printing mistake. The French word droit, meaning rights, was inadvertently substituted by the typesetter with droit, signifying right in the singular. The Russian translation failed to notice this distinction, leading to a significantly altered meaning of the text, suggesting a privilege bestowed upon a single nation. The Russian delegation, under Nesselrode's leadership, pushed for the inclusion of this interpretation in the official records. 5 years later, when Austria challenged these regulations, this specific clause proved to be a decisive factor in diplomatic discussions. The mistake, in the number, attributed to the typesetter's exhaustion after 3 consecutive night shifts, established a legal precedent that influenced port access for nearly 30 years. Occasionally, the use of the plural is inherently political. Fact 56th. In the year 1908, a worker at the Renault plant in Billancourt accidentally fitted a carburetor to the reverse side of the engine. This resulted in a model that, during a test run, unexpectedly demonstrated enhanced dynamic performance. The design team initially planned to discard the vehicle as faulty, but the test pilot advocated for another attempt. This marked the origin of the design that would later underpin Europe's first mass-market rear-engined automobile, the Renault 4CV. This particular model would come to represent the post-war reconstruction of France. The official record of the technical incident noted, components were repositioned without authorization from the engineer. An act deemed an infraction proved to be a significant find. The error on the assembly line, caused by rush, high temperatures, and an illegible blueprint, initiated a new trajectory in the automotive industry. Consequently, the phrase rear engine transitioned from an accident report to a successful car model. Fact 57th. In January of 1909, while German Kaiser Wilhelm II was visiting Istanbul, the ceiling in a reception hall of the Sultan's palace fell. This was not due to negligence, but an accidental overload. During cleaning, a heavy flower basket, a gift from the German delegation, was attached to the crystal chandelier. Fortunately, no one was hurt when the chandelier fell, and the talks were only delayed by 1 day. Nevertheless, this unexpected incident allowed one of the Turkish ministers, Halil Bey, to have an informal meeting with the Kaiser in the palace library. It was during this meeting that the Berlin-Baghdad railway project was first mentioned, a project that would later become a source of many years of debate and a key to influence in the region. A single basket, hung for decoration, damaged the ceiling and, at the same time, created an opening for dialogue. Diplomacy sometimes occurs not at the negotiation table, but by a library globe when a cleaner simply miscalculated the weight of a floral arrangement. Fact 58th. In the year 1964, at a military testing ground located near Kuibyshev, exercises took place involving the deployment of the latest surface-to-surface missiles.
During the preparation phase, one of the radio operators erroneously input the launch code on a frequency designated for a training signal. Consequently, the missile did indeed launch, but it proceeded to coordinates set by default, a location in the steppe adjacent to an unused water tower. The projectile hit its target accurately, and no destruction resulted. Nevertheless, upon examining the reason for this event, engineers found that this particular zero code circumvented failures in the self-destruct system and could be utilized for manual adjustments. Building upon these findings, a reserve guidance algorithm for a silent start was created. This algorithm was later incorporated into the Rapid Response Protocol. The missile, launched due to an incorrect input in the radio cipher, yielded an idea rather than a controversy. A single erroneous pulse in the radio code formed the basis for the dependability of future generations of armaments.
Fact 59th. During the peace treaty negotiations in Shimonoseki, Japan in 1905, concluding the Russo-Japanese War, the Russian delegation's translator, Alexei Krivtsov, misinterpreted the term perpetual access. He rendered it as access as needed, which considerably weakened the legal stipulation concerning Russia's rights to operate the railway in southern Manchuria. The Japanese delegation observed this alteration but chose not to contest it, thus codifying a more favorable wording in the final agreement. Krivtsov's error was only discovered back in St. Petersburg, yet there was no attempt to revisit the signed treaty. This incident later contributed to the rationale for the complete withdrawal of Russian economic entities from the area. The phrase, translated with excessive leniency, perhaps to avoid increasing tensions during the talks, led to the forfeiture of a crucial transport route. A single linguistic misstep meant the loss of a vital railway connection on the empire's map. Fact 60. In the year 1934, a junior assistant in a Belgrade laboratory, identified as Jovanovic, cast doubt upon the findings from experiments involving bacteriophages. While conducting a test, he inadvertently employed water from a used vial that held a chlorinated mixture. According to standard procedures, this should have resulted in the elimination of the microorganisms. Nevertheless, the phages persisted and continued their activity. This result was initially dismissed as a mistake, but the assistant retained the specimen and dispatched it to Paris. There, microbiologists at the Pasteur Institute took an interest in it. Investigations revealed that it was a previously undiscovered strain of a resilient viral agent possessing the ability to endure harsh conditions. This discovery initiated a new research avenue, culminating in the development of early phage therapy models for combating persistent infections. The entire process began when a laboratory attendant depleted their supply of distilled water and resorted to using an available flask containing bleach. An oversight in safety protocols inadvertently laid the groundwork for an alternative to antibiotics. Fact 61. In the year 1928, while preparing the Contemporary Art of Eastern Europe exhibition in New York, the Metropolitan Museum's employees erroneously listed works by avant-garde artist Isaac Rabinovich in the catalog, attributing them to the Lithuanian school. However, Rabinovich actually lived and created in Kharkiv, representing Ukrainian constructivism. This confusion served as an unintentional promotional campaign. Following the exhibition, collectors actively started purchasing his art, and the artist himself was invited to London and Paris. Subsequently, Rabinovich would contribute to establishing the design curriculum in the USSR, leveraging his European acclaim. One catalog, containing a geographical mistake, opened up the Western market for the artist and introduced the country to its first officially recognized modernist. The museum staff later humorously remarked, "We found a new author while searching for an old school." Fact 62nd. In 1963, while visiting the USSR, Fidel Castro was invited to take a walk around VDNK during a pause in his scheduled meetings. The itinerary was put together at the very last moment, and the person accompanying him mistakenly guided him away from the Cuba Pavilion and into a hall where the newest Soviet refrigerators and freezers were on display.
Castro, struck by the technologies for preserving food, asked for a private showing. This particular event marked the beginning of an agreement for the delivery of Soviet home appliances to Cuba, leading to a sequence of barter arrangements. Sugar was traded for electronic goods and refrigeration units. An unexpected turn in a VDNK hallway marked the commencement of exports that had not been part of the initial discussions. This occurrence is sometimes known in historical accounts as the Cold Turn, and this designation relates to more than just the temperature. Fact 63rd. In 1942, Los Angeles experienced an air raid alert when radars picked up unknown objects above the coastline. Sirens sounded across the city for several hours, anti-aircraft batteries fired defensive rounds, and searchlights swept the sky. Citizens were in a state of panic, expecting a Japanese bombing raid. However, no enemy planes were present in the sky. It was later determined that the incident was caused by a radar echo from a weather balloon that was inadvertently launched from a weather service base. The balloon was carried aloft by the night breeze rather than being released by the operator on the scheduled day. The balloon itself was attached for a training exercise and kept on the station's balcony. Standard procedure required it to be lowered, but a technician, unwilling to descend to the storage area, secured the balloon with only its bottom loop. A gust of wind broke the attachment, leading to the Battle of Los Angeles, the biggest air engagement of World War II, with a helium-filled rubber bag as the opponent. 300 rounds were expended, 3 individuals sustained injuries, and 1 lamp was put out of commission. Fact 64th. In the year 1899, a pharmacy in Arles, France, received the wrong ingredient. The delivery contained cinchona bark extract instead of camphor decoction, resulting in a very bitter flavor. The local pharmacist opted to save money by using the incorrect extract in his tonics instead of sending it back. A cafe owner became interested in one of these tonics, which was mixed with orange juice and vermouth. This marked the beginning of the first cocktail recipe, eventually known as the Americano. The famous Negroni would later be created using this recipe. The combination of a mistaken delivery, a frugal apothecary, and a creative bartender sparked a whole aperitif culture. A recipe that might have been sold at a discount became a signature of European bars. An incorrect shipping order led to a taste that has lasted for 300 years. Fact 65th. During January of 1916, French sappers were engaged in digging a tunnel beneath Verdun. A calculation error by one of the workers resulted in the tunnel being driven a bit north of its intended path. Although engineers were unhappy, there was no time for adjustments due to the approaching German offensive. As a result, what was meant to be the main evacuation tunnel became an auxiliary exit, leading toward a slope deemed unpromising. 2 months later, this very exit became the sole accessible path for retreat when German artillery neutralized all other communication lines. It is thought that this mistake saved the lives of as many as 2,000 people. The incident report was named a deviation of 38 paces. This specific displacement, stemming from a worn theodolite and the earth mover's exhaustion, turned into a lifeline. Occasionally, salvation appears not in the planned location or at the desired moment. Fact 66th. The spire for the Chrysler Building was designed by architect Raymond Hood in New York in 1931. The plan was to install it secretly to ensure the building was several meters taller than its rival, the Bank of Manhattan Trust Building. However, a mechanical error in calculating the counterweight occurred during the crane installation, resulting in a 7-degree deviation of the structure as it was being lifted. Workers corrected the issue by strengthening the main support, which led to a modification in the spire's form. This resulted in the tower gaining a distinctive curve and a pointed, elongated shape that would become its characteristic silhouette. Later, critics praised its superb aerodynamics, though this was an accidental outcome stemming from the concern of the metal dome falling onto 47th Street. Consequently, a technical mistake produced one of the most iconic silhouettes of the 20th century. The form was not planned, it was rescued. Fact 67th. In the year 1909, in Budapest, at the Municipal Printing House, a mix-up of typecases happened while printing a social democratic campaign bulletin. The slogan on the title page was supposed to be Errore a szabadságért, forward for freedom, but it came out as Errore a szabóért, forward for the tailor. The publisher, in a state of panic, instructed that the entire print run be recalled, but 100 copies had already made their way into the workers' neighborhood. The phrase struck people as funny and relevant. It quickly became part of anecdotes, was frequently cited, and evolved into a local meme. What is remarkable is that shortly thereafter, in the same district, a worker from a clothing tailoring cooperative was elected to its board of directors, and this accidental slogan became the foundation for their election campaign. Newspapers reported at the time, "Now freedom and the tailor are moving forward together." Years later, the phrase found its way into compilations of Hungarian street folklore. A single typesetter, by mistakenly swapping two letter cases, contributed more to the slogan's widespread adoption than the entire party school.
Fact 68. In the year 1948, when the first diplomatic courier from Israel was dispatched from Tel Aviv to Moscow, the embassy mail was mistakenly routed to the Foreign Intelligence Archive instead of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. This occurred due to a malfunction in the new sorting system at Sheremetyevo Airport. The form had been completed in German, causing the OCR, character recognition machine, to send the bag to a bin labeled Geheimdienst. The mail remained in a sealed area for 2 days. Lieutenant Samsonov, while inspecting the exterior packaging, found a peculiar handwritten inscription among the labels, proof of connection to the USA. This was an internal annotation by an Israeli staff member related to economic reports on post-war assistance. Subsequently, the systematic development of an espionage network in Israel commenced. A single automated sorter, an additional phrase on the packaging, and an incorrect destination resulted in the creation of an intelligence thread that lasted for 50 years.
Fact 69th. In 1932, a toy factory in Czechoslovakia decided to sell off its surplus of older doll models. To enhance their lifelike quality, they incorporated a built-in squeaker, originally intended for dog toys, but mistakenly supplied. This component emitted a sharp, high-pitched sound, akin to a scream. While children found the sound unappealing, another development emerged. An educator noticed that a child responded to the squeaker sound more readily than to standard instructions. Consequently, the squeaker was adopted for auditory rehabilitation in children with hearing difficulties, and subsequently became a standard indicator in pediatric audiology assessments. The manufacturing focus shifted, transforming the doll squeakers into medical devices. An initial marketing misstep evolved into a diagnostic instrument. The erroneous toy shipment ceased to be a source of amusement, but gained the capacity to be perceived. Fact 70th. In the year 1960, while broadcasting Nikita Khrushchev's visit to an aviation factory in Novospork Live, an operator mistakenly activated the zoom. At that precise moment, the camera was aimed not at the person speaking, but at the assembly line. The resulting broadcast showed a board detailing the production schedule, with the words "Failure to meet deadlines is inevitable" clearly visible. Those in the Kremlin watching the transmission requested an explanation. The factory underwent an audit, which exposed a widespread system of inflated numbers, fraudulent bonus schemes, and fake reports about product completion. The leadership was removed. The method uncovered by the accidental broadcast served as the foundation for establishing a genuine accounting system in industrial facilities, foreshadowing future automated control. A single incorrect shot, a focus on something in the background, and the TV camera acts as a mirror reflecting reality. The camera erred, but the truth was shown. The 71st fact. In the year 1946, in Vienna, at the site of a former school that served as a temporary headquarters for the Allies, the public address system wire between floors snapped. A technician dispatched to fix it, by mistake, connected an external receiving line instead of the communication cable. As a result, the private discussion of British officers was transmitted via radio, which was connected to a field radio channel. During the broadcast, Great Britain's plans to delay the withdrawal of its forces from certain occupied areas involving France and the USA were being discussed. Soviet radio operators monitoring this particular channel made a recording of this exchange. This information was immediately forwarded to Moscow, prompting a response in the form of several strong diplomatic notes. Consequently, the agreement that had been scheduled for coordinating Austria's post-war management was disrupted. A single misplaced connector in an old distribution unit terminated the concept of multilateral oversight. It is sometimes the case that significant political strategies fail in the same locations where children once studied the Morse code. Fact 72nd. In the year 1998, while paintings were being restored at the Louvre, Georges de la Tour's work, The Card Players, was temporarily relocated to a different room. The curator in charge incorrectly noted the old inventory number, causing the painting to be exhibited in the French Baroque folklore section, near obscure pieces from regional holdings. An accidental visit to this room by the famous director Bernard Tavernier resulted in a surprising development. He found inspiration in the painting's composition and light and chose to incorporate its depiction into his movie, The Judge and the Killer. Later, the film's camera work was acclaimed as among the finest in 70s French cinema. De la Tour's painting was rediscovered, and its standing was raised to that of a museum-quality masterpiece. A single incorrect number on the relocation record transformed a dim spot into a source of inspiration. And a cinematic shot originated from an accidental placement of a hook 2 meters off. Fact 73rd. In the year 1935, while building the first line of the Moscow Metro, the head driller, Frome Mishenko, misunderstood an engineer's order. Rather than digging the tunnel deeper by 1.5 meters between the Smolenskaya and Arbatskaya stations, he started raising the ceiling. This led to a section with an unusually high roof, which produced a dome's acoustic effect. Even though the error was spotted relatively quickly, they didn't fix it because they were running out of time. A decade later, this specific segment was chosen for trials of a new kind of underground communication, as the echoes there were exceptionally clear. This concept later formed the basis for the Metro's public announcement system. Mishenko's mistake became a training example described as an instance of unintended beneficial curvature. A metro built with a flaw proved to be a perfect testing ground. This happened simply because someone mixed up and down in a spoken directive heard over the din of pneumatic drills. Fact 74th. During 1941, when Japan was planning its assault on Pearl Harbor, the Imperial Navy's cryptographers employed a specific code table identified as Purple 97. 24 hours prior to the raid, an official at the Ministry of Foreign Affairs in Tokyo mistakenly transmitted a part of a diplomatic message out of its correct order. As a result, the communication declaring the termination of diplomatic ties with the United States was dispatched in 2 installments, not in the intended sequence. In Washington, this led to bewilderment because the telegram received on the morning of December 7th lacked the crucial statement about the cessation of talks. U.S. intelligence, having managed to intercept and decode the message, failed to recognize it as a signal for an attack due to the jumbled order. The additional time proved advantageous for Japan. Historians continue to discuss whether this error was unintentional or deliberate. Nevertheless, a draft of the original dispatch with a red pencil annotation, Junju, translating to order, is preserved in the Japanese Ministry of Foreign Affairs archives. This marginal doubt served as an unseen indicator that the war had begun. Fact 75th. In the year 1960, at the Olympic Games held in Rome, a technical mistake happened during the awarding of the Polish runner Elżbieta Krasinska.
The individual in charge of the sound tapes mistakenly swapped them and, instead of the Polish anthem, played a recording from a local concert. A popular romance composed to Vivaldi's music was heard. A pause ensued. Bewilderment was evident, and the applause was restrained, making it seem like a slight mix-up. Nevertheless, back in the athlete's country, this event provoked a significant outcry. Government newspapers described the incident as an exhibition of arrogance from the organizers. Meanwhile, among young people, the recording spread as a popular radio jingle, referred to as the unofficial anthem of sports. Within a year, composer Władysław Szpilman composed a march based on the same tune, which later served as the musical signature for Polish television. A malfunction in the playback device and an unmarked cassette led to the creation of a melody that would subsequently introduce broadcasts of Olympic triumphs. Fact 76. In 1864, at the Châtellerault arms factory in France, a foundry worker, Jules Renault, accidentally employed an old mold meant for 36th-year model muskets. Consequently, a non-standard part with a peculiar gunpowder chamber was produced. An engineer conducting tests, without grasping its function, attempted to insert a primer cap into it. He observed that the ignition process was quicker and cleaner. This observation initiated the development of a new type of percussion primer. This primer was later incorporated into the French Chassepot rifle. The technology subsequently spread throughout Europe and arrived in Russia, where it was utilized in sporting firearms. A single overlooked mold, hastily cast during an evening shift, became an innovation. Renault later mentioned that he had meant to report the flaw but missed the morning briefing. Tiredness, the old mold, and a small amount of gunpowder turned a factory mistake into an exportable technology.
Fact 77th. In the year 1937, in Leningrad, while shooting a film about the revolution, a lighting technician was unable to cope with the workload and accidentally pointed a powerful spotlight not at the scene, but out of a window across the street, thereby lighting up a corner of a derelict warehouse. Shooting was halted as the lamp required cooling. However, the operator noticed silhouettes inside the warehouse. Figures were moving amongst the crates. The police were summoned. It was discovered that the building was being used by an illicit group involved in the trade of trophy weapons. 8 individuals were apprehended, and approximately 20 rifles, along with a scarce pistol from the Civil War period, were confiscated. This event was reported by Leningradskaya Pravda, which referenced the vigilance of Soviet cinema. The technician himself commented in an interview, "I simply made a mistake. I didn't tighten the lens." This misstep served as a catalyst for an investigation. A single ray of light, misdirected, revealed that which had remained concealed in the shadows for a decade.
Fact 78. In 1962, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, while negotiations were at their peak, a phone rang in the White House's Oval Office. This was not the direct line to the Pentagon, but a standard internal telephone. The call was placed by the secretary to Vice President Lyndon Johnson. She had mistakenly dialed the number, intending to order coffee for an upcoming evening session. Those in attendance momentarily paused, as the ringing happened while they were deliberating on a response to a presumed nuclear attack. John F. Kennedy, hearing the woman's voice on the receiver, let out a laugh and remarked, "So, we still have time for coffee." The tension dissipated, and it was then that he made the decision to delay the countermove by 4 hours. It was within this time frame that news arrived of the Soviet Union easing its position. A secretary's error, a key pressed, and an order that was not given. Occasionally, a call asking, "With sugar?" separates war from negotiation. Fact 79th. In the year 1832, in Berlin, during a session of the Royal Academy of Sciences, mathematician Peter Dirichlet decided not to present his pre-prepared lecture on number theory. This decision was due to a cold he caught in the morning, which resulted in a hoarse voice. As an alternative, so as not to leave the meeting completely, he concisely presented the outline of a different, not yet published concept. This concept would later be recognized as the Dirichlet principle or the box principle.
The core idea was straightforward. If the number of containers is less than the number of objects, a match is inevitable. A student by the name of Carl Stein, who was present at the lecture, recorded these thoughts and disseminated them within his group of young mathematicians. Many decades later, this principle would serve as the basis for fields such as cryptography, probability theory, and combinatorics. The entire development stemmed from the professor's inability to speak for longer than 10 minutes. A single strained voice on a rainy day converted a simple observation into an essential tool. The lecture that was nearly canceled proved to be exceptionally productive.
Fact 80. In the year 1909, aboard a Russian ship en route from Vladivostok to Nagasaki, mechanic Nikolai Shaposhnikov chose to brew tea in the engine room. He positioned the kettle next to the oil intake port, which resulted in steam inadvertently entering the cooling system. A sharp temperature difference caused the fuel line to contract abruptly, leading to the engine's shutdown. The ship started drifting. The following day, while waiting for repairs, the crew observed peculiar gatherings of fish in the vicinity and commenced fishing operations. It was discovered that the ship had drifted over a ridge where tuna shoals were concentrated, a location previously undocumented. This location would subsequently become a vital strategic zone for fishing, and the initial chart of fishing windows for the East Coast would be created using the coordinates from that very vessel. One kettle, a single cloud of steam, one unplanned engine halt, and the entire fishing economy is redirected 100 kilometers southward. The captain later remarked, Shaposhnikov placed the tea incorrectly again, and fortunately so.
Fact 81. In the year 1922, in Paris, while Marcel Proust was dictating a new page for In Search of Lost Time, his secretary, Jacques Arnaud, was diverted by corridor sounds and swapped two sentences. This led to the appearance of a combination in the draft that Proust himself had not spoken, and the scent was not insistent but insinuating. Upon reviewing it, the author commented, "I would not have phrased it that way, but it is superior." The sentence was kept. Subsequently, literary scholars would refer to this expression as Proust's insinuating turn and regard it as the apex of the author's stylistic approach. Arnaud confessed in his memoirs that he had simply failed to hear the word, returning to the sentence late. A single noise from the corridor, a single missed second, and the writer's delivery shifted. An error that blended into the concept and became integral to it. True style sometimes emerges not from the original concept, but from the interval between two sounds.
Fact 82nd. In 1954, within a Chicago laboratory dedicated to the synthesis of new plastics, an incident occurred involving a lab technician named Andrew Carter. He was working with a defective thermometer, its mercury column giving unreliable readings. The inaccurate temperature measurement resulted in the reaction being conducted at a lower temperature than intended. Consequently, the chemist halted the experiment, believing it to be a failure. However, it was subsequently found that during this seemingly unsuccessful process, a new compound, polytetrafluoroethylene, better known as Teflon, had formed in the test tube. This material exhibited thermal resistance, chemical inertness, and was perfectly suited for coating frying pans and manufacturing rocket components. Carter was awarded a prize, and the malfunctioning thermometer was donated to the factory's museum. When questioned about his failure to verify the temperature, he responded, "Who would have thought an error was the formula?" A single malfunction led to the creation of a surface that nothing adheres to. Fact 83rd. In the year 1970, the government of India commissioned a series of school maps. The requirement was that the state borders on these maps should be depicted in strict adherence to New Delhi's stance, omitting any disputed territories. However, the printing facility in Calcutta, upon receiving the layout, inadvertently employed an old British matrix. This matrix featured a border with China drawn according to a line that benefited Beijing. The print run, exceeding 1 million copies, had already reached schools before the Ministry of Education sounded the alarm. Crucially, one of these wall charts appeared in the footage of a Chinese television news report. Subsequently, Beijing declared, "India recognizes the territory as ours." Despite later retractions, the event served as a propaganda advantage and was incorporated into Chinese educational materials as unofficial acknowledgement. The map, erroneously printed because of an old template and the editor's limited time, turned into a point of contention in the disagreement between two nuclear-armed nations. A single imprint from an offset machine on a warm day led to diplomacy fracturing at the crease.
Fact 84th. In the year 1895, in London, a construction team working on a sewer project in Whitechapel discovered old brickwork. Behind this structure, they found several paper bundles with singed edges. The foreman's plan was to submit the discovery to the archive. However, as no museum employee was available at the site, he left the papers in the tea room of the precinct. A stoker there subsequently used them for lighting a fire by chance. One of the bundles, which did survive, was later decoded. It proved to be the diary of a police inspector, containing the name of a potential suspect in the Jack the Ripper investigation, a Polish barber residing on Dorset Street. The reference was brief, lacking specifics, but noted an interrogation. This record became one of the few indirect leads that historians would later consider significant. The peculiar aspect is that just an hour prior, another bundle referencing the same location was destroyed by fire in an ash bin. One teapot, one piece of wood, one necessary tidying. The mystery of history remained unsolved, yet a stray ink mark endured. Fact 85th. During the preparation of a poster for the Berlin showing of Battleship Potemkin in 1926, a printing error occurred. The scene titled Murder of the Sailor was replaced with Murder of the People. This mistake was seen as a potent propaganda metaphor, and the organizers opted to leave it uncorrected, believing it enhanced the message. The slogan quickly caught the attention of anti-fascist groups, leading to its reproduction on flyers, posters, and banners. The following year, Bertolt Brecht incorporated the same phrase into an essay discussing cinema's role in revolution. The typographical error thus gave rise to a form of rhetoric that would later be integrated into the framework of European anti-authoritarian culture. A single typesetter, in haste to complete his shift, miskeyed a letter, initiating a slogan that persisted in political theaters until the close of the 20th century. This phenomenon is termed a production metaphor in educational contexts. In practice, it was simply an errant letter that was not promptly rectified. Fact 86th. In the year 1980, a Canadian engineer, Walter Mason, was engaged in the installation of a radio tower in Sierra Leone. An error in the voltage calculation caused the equipment to fail and transmit a strong radio signal. This signal was unintentionally picked up by students from Ghana Technical University who were working with their own constructed apparatus. The signal puzzled them as it aligned with frequencies that should have been inactive. The students started a deeper inquiry, and Akufo Dadzi, one of them, observed that the signal penetrated a zone identified as a radio shadow without issue. This finding would later contribute to the creation of the first cost-effective way to retransmit signals in African villages characterized by challenging topography. Local communication networks, such as emergency services and educational radio, would come into being due to a single tower's breakdown and the fact that a receiver remained operational. An accidental glitch served as the basis for the entire system. Fact 87th. In the year 1901, at the Phoenix factory in Riga, which manufactured sewing machines, a 14-year-old apprentice turner, Yanis Lassis, mistakenly altered part dimensions during a night shift. He produced a modified bobbin carriage with a recess instead of the standard one. The master craftsman opted to investigate the impact of this altered shape on thread tension, instead of discarding it as scrap. The findings indicated that this new configuration permitted the use of finer, more elastic threads without them snapping. Although the product did not proceed to mass production, the schematic was preserved in the workshop's logbook. 12 months later, an engineer at the St. Petersburg Machinery Exhibition observed the blueprint and integrated it into the design for Fourier machines, essential for the large-scale manufacturing of gymnasticas during the First World War. Consequently, a component born from an apprentice's error became the standard for military attire. Lassys eventually pursued a career as an engineer, but by that time, his miscalculated measurement had already become integrated into the frontline supply chain. Fact 88. In the year 1974, in Los Angeles, while a Frank Zappa concert was being prepared, a member of the lighting crew made a mistake in the programming. They turned on the stage lights directly during the rehearsal, contrary to the lighting plan which specified total darkness. The instantaneous, bright floodlight illuminated the rows of the auditorium where city council members were seated, observing the rehearsal to evaluate adherence to moral standards. They departed the hall, blinded and disconcerted. The concert was given the go-ahead, with no apparent violations noted. This unintended flash of light, an erroneous lamp activation due to a dimmer program malfunction, granted the musicians the freedom to perform in their original format, free from any censorship edits. Subsequently, Zappa integrated this same technical maneuver, lighting the audience instead of the stage, into his performances as a gesture of open dialogue. A single button in the darkness, and the control system was momentarily blinded. Fact 89th. In the year 1949, in the early months of the Berlin airlifts activity, American pilot Gail Halvorsen accidentally dropped a sack of food supplies not onto the intended landing zone. It fell into a school where children were present, rather than the supply headquarters. To rectify the situation, he tied candies to the subsequent delivery, using handkerchiefs as makeshift parachutes. This concept was popular, and the children started waving handkerchiefs at him from the ground. The headquarters received thank you letters, and the military authorized its continuation. This marked the beginning of Operation Candy Bomber, a comprehensive humanitarian effort that symbolized goodwill during the Cold War era. It originated from the pilot's navigational error and his visual estimation of the landing spot. A single mistake in navigation resulted in a gift reaching childhood instead of a state-owned depot. The candies, entwined with handkerchiefs, thawed not only the cold, but also the solid structures of ideologies. Fact 90. In Moscow, in 1925, while Leon Trotsky was recording a speech for the party archive, the sound technician mistakenly activated the rehearsal listening button instead of the recording function. The initial 10 minutes of his address were lost. The speech was delivered with passion and flair, but replicating that same impact in a second recording proved impossible. Consequently, the surviving version was dull, and its transcript failed to impress. Upon comparing the draft with the recorded text, the Central Committee concluded that Trotsky had lost his edge. This assessment impacted how his stance in the power struggle was viewed. A year after his political downfall, the recording of his muted speech was cited as an example of a diluted stance. A single technical mishap, a single wrong setting, and the orator's fiery words were rendered void. In this way, the power of the voice was silenced by a button. Fact 91. In the year 1891, in Lyon, an electrician named Georges Piquet, during the installation of a telephone line connecting two factories, encountered a segment where an unrecorded metal cable was already buried underground. To prevent a circuit overload, he opted to reroute the wire via a different path, through the wall of the municipal archive. Along this specific route, the signal maintained remarkable steadiness, even with the extended distance. Piquet found this noteworthy. The building was effectively blocking outside disturbances. He documented this finding in his report, and several years later, his shielding formula was implemented in the construction of the inaugural secure communication line between Paris and London. The unintentional route selection and the disinclination to excavate an additional meter of trench initiated a technology crucial for espionage and diplomatic operations. Piquet later remarked, "My only intention was to avoid damaging the paving stones, but in doing so, I established a basis."
Fact 92nd. In the year 1909 in Petersburg, at a gathering of Mir Iskustva, World of Art, a mechanic mistakenly loaded slides in the wrong sequence for a new projection of symbolist poetry. The intended progression of darkness, flash, catharsis was replaced by scenes moving backward on the screen, from light into darkness. This initially led to bewilderment. However, the poets present found inspiration in the effect, discussing a new turn in mystical form. Osip Mandelstam, then a young man, recorded a concept of vanishing light in his notebook, which he later incorporated into his poem Tristia. The mistake, stemming from hurried work and unmarked slide containers, had a significant impact on a whole generation of lyric writers. The slides, meant to signify purification, instead led to obscurity, creating a metaphor that defined the Silver Age of Russian literature. The altered sequence established a new emotional order. Fact 93rd. In the year 1941, in Washington, at a session focused on creating a civil defense system, Colonel Walter Drake from the technical department presented a scheme for evacuation in case of bombing. He erroneously utilized a map from the preceding year, where a school in the city's southeast sector was designated as a warehouse. Therefore, the building was incorporated into the instructions under the category of unfit for civilian placement. 1 year later, during an air raid, a false alarm triggered by exercises, the majority of the evacuated population was sent to adjacent zones. It was later discovered that the school building would have been the most resilient to an attack owing to its concrete ceilings, water supply, and independent ventilation. This incident prompted a reconsideration of civil protection tenets and became the foundation for developing a classification of shelters based on their structural type rather than their intended use. A single map without a signature, a single forgotten stamp in the archives, and the entire framework of safety begins to follow an altered course. Fact 94th. In 1863, in Kiev, Professor Julian Kulikovsky, who taught Latin, lectured on medieval text grammar. He accidentally swapped pages and started discussing an unknown passage about paint production instead of his planned topic on declensions. He tried to apologize, but the students, who included future philologists, wondered where the excerpt came from. Investigations began, and after a year, the text was recognized as a piece of a lost recipe for Kiev blue, a bright pigment used in 11th century icon painting. This find initiated a whole field of studying ecclesiastical color, affected restoration methods, and became representative of the Ukrainian bright tone. It all stemmed from papers falling onto a windowsill and folders being misplaced. A single word out of context restored a lost color to an entire period. Fact 95th. In the year 1960, in Alma-Ata, engineers at the television center were getting equipment ready for the first broadcast to reach all of Kazakhstan. One of the technicians, while testing the signal supply, inadvertently turned on a test graphic. This graphic displayed an unverified photograph from the Baikonur Cosmodrome as its background. The picture aired for 10 seconds, preceding the official commencement of the broadcast. Even though viewers only glimpsed a fuzzy outline of a rocket in a desert setting, the Central Censorship Directorate initiated a review. As a result, Moscow adjusted its rules for publishing information and established a policy of information containment until the launch was successfully completed. Therefore, an accidental image shown on screen because of an exhausted worker served as the catalyst for a new approach to information policy. From that point forward, space was regarded not just as an area of accomplishments, but also as a domain of complete confidentiality. The duration of this data leak was under 10 seconds, yet it resulted in 20 years of quiet. Fact 96th. During an anatomy lecture at Harvard in 1898, a professor's assistant projected a microscopic image of skin with a rare form of dermatitis instead of the correct slide. The picture was mistakenly thought to be lung pleura tissue, but a student in attendance pointed out structural variations. Her remark was initially disregarded, but the professor later re-examined the materials and confirmed the structural differences. This finding became the foundation for a theory about similar cellular responses in skin and the lung's outer membrane. 20 years later, this theory contributed to the creation of the dermato-respiratory model for managing chronic inflammatory conditions. A misplaced slide, a wrongly addressed container, and a single attentive student. These elements connected two branches of medicine. When skin conditions reflect lung issues, it's sometimes only perceived by someone who inadvertently activated the incorrect projector. Fact 97th. In the year 1980, at a radio plant in Erfurt, GDR, there was a disruption in the supply of Japanese components for tape recorders. Seeking to economize, engineer Brunsman suggested the use of non-standard, locally produced capacitors, which resulted in a somewhat duller sound. A party official, upon listening to a recording, commented, "This is now like real life without that bourgeois brilliance." This new standard was adopted as being more socially accurate, leading to all sound equipment manufactured in the GDR from then on being equipped with specific filtration branded as Volksklang, the people's sound. The situation originated from the depletion of Japanese stock at the warehouse, with available alternatives being implemented. Consequently, material shortages and an aversion to sharp high-frequency peaks defined the distinctive soundscape of socialist daily existence. The characteristic tone of the period was occasionally determined not in the recording studio, but within the procurement division. Fact 98. In the year 1928, in Rome, at a radioisotope laboratory, the researcher Bruno Pontecorvo was collecting data for a uranium experiment. One of the containers had a loose seal and started emitting ambient heat. To prevent a burn, a technician put a lead sheet from a different apparatus, a radiography device, between the container and the table. This piece of material was unintentionally fogged, and Pontecorvo, after conducting a measurement, found that uranium interacted with it in an unusual way compared to standard circumstances. This gave rise to the idea of pre-activating materials, which later advanced the technology for artificially inducing radioactivity. A mistaken storage, warmth from the container, and an unintended spacer between the equipment initiated a new era in nuclear physics. The radioactive jolt happened not within an accelerator, but in the lab stillness, when someone scalded their finger. Fact 99. In the year 1906, at the Bodleian Library in Oxford, a sorting error took place during the digitization of archives. Files containing ancient Greek treatises were intermingled with the catalogue of medieval alchemy. A student who was examining Herophilus' treatise on the eye's structure came across a file featuring a Latin translation of recipes. Upon recognizing familiar terminology, he understood that alchemists had drawn upon medical accounts of the circulatory system. This led to a surge of interest in correlating anatomical and esoteric texts, ultimately resulting in the establishment of history of scientific hermeneutics as a separate area within the historiography of science. A database mistake, an incorrect folder tag, and the curiosity of a student with extended holidays, these factors forged a connection between anatomy and alchemy that had been absent for 2,000 years. Unexpected moments of clarity, as it turns out, occur not at dissertation defenses, but when searching for a needed PDF among 100 disorganized files. Fact 100. During the 1960 Chess Olympiad in Leipzig, Soviet Grandmaster Viktor Korchnoi became disoriented with the hall numbering while en route to a tournament match. He mistakenly entered Sector E instead of Sector C, which led him backstage to a meeting of FIDE officials. There, he overheard discussions about potentially restricting the number of participants from socialist countries. This proposal was confidential and had not been officially disclosed. Korchnoi informed his delegation about the overheard conversation, enabling them to prepare counter-arguments beforehand and prevent the initiative from proceeding. This incident would later contribute to his estrangement from the Soviet chess establishment and eventually lead to his immigration. A single misplaced sign on a closet door, a single misstep, and a game yet to commence would take an unforeseen course. It was a chess match where the crucial element was not the piece's move, but the journey to the intended board.